Hi everyone, this is Professor Hart, and I'm taking you through a PowerPoint today for Linguistics 340, English language, spring 2021. And this is an introduction to the aspects of language we're going to be talking about this term. The first question you probably have is, what is linguistics? And a closely related question is, what does it mean to know a language? So if you take a moment and think about um, languages that you know, probably English, and you may have some familiarity with other languages, and you may or may not feel that you know those other languages also as a native speaker. You'll think about that there are many different facets to knowing a language, and that's what we're talking about in linguistics. Linguistics is a social science, and it uses empirical methods. So that means observation, direct experience, to explain and describe how a language develops, changes, and functions at both an individual and a societal level. We use language individually, but we use it also collectively, right? We use it to talk to each other, we use it to perform rituals, we use it to purchase things, right? We use it for all kinds of reasons. This is a picture, sorry, not a very good one, of one of my college roommates, Lee Wilson. And she affectionately got the nickname Lee the Flood Wilson because when we were in college, she was crying about French. And finally, she did pass French, the French requirement. And she said to me when we were graduating, can I put some knowledge of French on my resume? And I said, no, you cannot put that on your resume. And she said, can I put a reading knowledge of French? I said, Lee, you cannot put anything about French on your resume because you did not really gain a lot of French skills. And nor would I, even though I've studied French, I would not claim it on a resume because I do not have the level of French to use at school. So, what it means to know a language is not just to know some vocabulary or not just to know a few phrases, right? You really have to have a much deeper understanding of the language to use it and to understand it in the way the native speaker does. So let's look, we're going to break this down to what are some of the components that a native speakers know. If you look at this list of words, I'm just going to read them through and you can think them through in your head too. To, through, clue, shoe, sue. They all have something in common, right? The first list there, and it's the oo sound. Notice it's not spelled the same in all the words, but really we're talking about one sound at the end of all these words, oo. And so in linguistics, we're talking about the phonetics or the sound system of the language. Not every language uses every sound producible by the human apparatus, meaning the mouth, the teeth, the tongues, etc., which we'll explore more this week. And so when we're learning a language, we have to learn the sounds of that particular language. If you see this next list of words, cough, tough, bow, through, though, these are actually different sounds, even though they're spelled the same, right? Cough and though are different sounds. Similarly, if you look at cake, mat, call, any, and sofa, the A sound in cake is really different from the sound of sofa, even though it's being represented by the same letter. This is why starting this week, we are going to start looking at phonetics and learn something called the International Phonetic Alphabet, or IPA. And the reason for the IPA is these exact examples I'm showing you, we can't represent accurately through English spelling that all the sounds in the first list are the same, and yet the sounds in the second and third list are different from each other. And so we'll learn this new system of writing in order to represent what those sounds are. So stay tuned for that. It's pretty exciting. I had an aunt who was from Russia, and she got a job at Cracker Barrel, and she was really confused when people were asking for root beer. And she said, there is no root, right? There's only beer. And this was a lexicon problem. Lexicon's a fancy word for vocabulary. She knew what beer is, what alcoholic beer was. She did not know the term root beer. And so that was confusing to her. So one of the things you do need to know is the vocabulary. I was in France and I wanted coins in exchange for my bills, my francs, but I didn't know the word for coins. And so I was showing coins and doing all sorts of mimes, right? And when you don't have the vocabulary, right, that's a problem. You have to resort to other means, right, in order to communicate. So vocabulary is important, but it's only one aspect of language. Similarly, if you look at these signs, even if you could say the word or hear the word for the entrance or the exit or in and out, you might not be able to read it. So the writing system is actually separate from the spoken system. Writing came after speech, and not all languages have a writing system. So language doesn't actually have to have a writing system to be a complete language. But if you're going to learn a language and use it, knowing the writing system is very useful. Going along with the writing system, we already saw this a little bit in previous slide. Here's the Berenstain Bears, and this poor bear is trying to spell failure. She's got a lot of good guesses here. None of these are how we spell failure in English, right? So we'll talk about with the writing system, spelling and why spelling doesn't really match up with, as we talked about, the spoken sounds. There are historical reasons for it, to give you a hint. We'll talk about that later. My husband had a roommate in college named Miguel, who was from Colombia. And he would wake up in the morning and ask my husband, whose name is Roger, Royer, Royer, what time it is, what time it is. Now, there are a couple things going on here. One is the just sound, right, is being translated to a yes sound because of the language difference and accent difference. So it's part of the sound system. But also this, and I'm sure it jumps right out at you, what time it is not how we would say this, right? We would ask, what time is it? And that is a syntax or word order issue. So knowing the words is one thing, and then knowing the order to put them in that sounds correct to a native speaker is another issue. Now, obviously, my husband understood what he was asking. It's not unintelligible, but it's just not the way a native speaker would say it. If you look at these sentences, again, I think what does not sound correct to you will stand out. I go to the store and buy some fruit. It was rotten. I was dishappy. But you can see how if someone was not a native English speaker, they would be making some pretty good guesses in these sentences. And their guesses are based on morphology or word structure. So ed is a very common past tense ending, but we have a lot of irregular verbs, right? Instead of go, I went. Instead of buy, I bought. We also have some prefixes that change the meaning, right, of the root word. So dishappy, dis and un are actually both mean not, right? Dissatisfied, you would say, but unhappy. And we'll talk about why that is, why we have different, we attach different affixes to different words, and it's related to some of the things with the sound system. But this morphology, or how word structure, how words are formed and words are made out of other words, is also a key part of knowing a language. If you look at this sentence, the blue big round balloon popped. It probably doesn't sound right to you. It's not as glaring as some of the previous examples we've looked at, but it is violating some rules that we have in English for adjective, the order in which adjectives are placed. And so this is a grammar issue, or how to form sentences. And we will be taking a pretty deep dive into grammar, actually, because I know many of you will be teaching it. And I think it's really important just to have some experience and some confidence in investigating grammar a little bit. So we'll do some pretty fun things actually with grammar. I think you might be surprised. I asked a class one year to go to the bookstore and buy a blue book for the exam. And if you've ever bought a blue book, you know it's a little book. It's blue. Some of them are green now. They say they're recycled, so they're green books. But it's a little stapled book of paper that you write your exam answers in. But I said this to a class, and a non-native speaker in my class went to the bookstore and was asking them for a blue textbook. They didn't know what he was talking about, right? It was very frustrating for him. And I understood the miscommunication immediately, because of course he didn't have any context for what a blue book was. So this is semantics or meaning or ambiguity, because a blue book could be a book with a blue cover, but in this case, it means a particular kind of stapled soft cover paper that you use to write an exam. So there was ambiguity or confusion, right, generated by the use of the term blue book in this example. If you look at these expressions, which are probably familiar to you, what's up, don't have a cow man, he's a pig, or lose the old spare tire, you know that the old spare tire is probably not the tire in the back of the car. It probably means the person's gut, right? They want to lose some weight. But imagine if you're a non-native speaker, these can be very confusing. Someone saying what's up and you're looking up in the air trying to understand what is going on. Or someone says a person is a pig and clearly there's no farm animals around. That's confusing, right? And these are non-literal expressions or slang or idioms or figures of speech, right? Things that native speakers know that are not, they're not logical, they're metaphorical. And so you have to have some knowledge of the language and sometimes the culture to understand why these are true. My One of my friends his wife was from Colombia, and she said to him about her friend, Kelly is graduating, that little son of a bitch. And she said it in a very, she loved her and it was a term of endearment. And he just said, oh my goodness, I think you're misunderstanding the use of the term son of a bitch. It's not a term of endearment, right? This is something that insults people, right, et cetera. And so I had to kind of correct it. So this is pragmatics or language in use. And I don't know if she had heard someone jokingly, call someone this term, and that's where the confusion came from. But some terms are appropriate in certain situations and not in other situations. And that's again part of learning the language. So that's pragmatics. When is it right to say a particular thing? In my first year of college, I said to my friends, and I'm from Cleveland, and we were in Boston, and I said, I'm going to the pop machine. And they all said, what are you talking about? Where are you going? And they did not have that regional term, right, for a can of Coke or can of soda, whatever you would call it. And so they thought it was really weird. So this is language variation or dialect. So depending upon where you live, where you grew up, where your relatives are from, you may have different terms for different things. And we're all speaking English, obviously, but these are different varieties of English. So we're going to talk about that and what that means for you as teachers as well. When I was growing up, I had this was the 80s. So you have to go back in time with me for a second here. I had a little computer that was an educational computer, and it spoke in this very monotone voice, and I'm going to mimic it here for you. It said, "Hell, this is K28, your talking, learning computer. I can teach you math, reading, and spelling," and it went on and on, right? So even though it's kind of amazing in the 80s that there was this machine that I was working with that was teaching me all these great things, the computer voice did not sound very human or like a native speaker of English. And that has to do with speech, rhythm, and tone, right? Did not modulate the tone, and its rhythm was very stilted and not the way that people normally speak. So that's another aspect, right, of language. This is another one of my college roommates, Farida El Gamal, and her father's Egyptian and her mother's Japanese, and she studied finance. And she got a job at JP Morgan in London working with Japanese customers. And the reason that she was perfect for the job, and they loved it and they wanted her for this job, is because she knew not only the finance, but also the language and the customs. She knew when to bow, how deeply to bow, how to be polite to Japanese businessmen. And these are really hard things to learn. I mean, it's very complicated and intricate. And she could read, if someone was upset or if someone was excited, right? So these skills were, in addition to finance skills, right, really, really strong skills that she had for this job. And she still works for the same company. A few basic tenets of linguistics that I want to leave you with that we'll be talking about all term, but these are kind of foundational tenets that you should know. Number one, all living languages are in constant flux. And if you just think about this for a second, you know this because the slang that your parents used is not the slang that you used, is not the slang that your kids and grandkids are going to use, right? So it is constantly changing. We'll look at that historically, and we'll look at kind of what's happening now too. So we'll take a lot of look at that. If a language is not changing, it's because it's dead. It's because no one is speaking it, no one's using it. It's only in old books, right? And you can look at it, you can read it, you can understand it, but it's not dynamically changing in the way that a currently in use language is. The second tenet is that one language variety or one dialect is not better than another. And this is sometimes challenging for us to overcome as people who grow up in a particular society, a US society, because we have an idea from our education and from society about how an English speaker should sound. And we may have ideas about which regions of the country speak good English, quote unquote good English, and which ones don't, right? But we'll take a look at how every dialect actually has its own set of rules and is consistent within itself. It's not errors. It is a different dialect. It's literally a different version, right, of English. So we're going to talk about that. And finally, this goes with number two, linguistics is descriptive, not prescriptive. So descriptive means linguists describe what is actually happening. What do people actually say and write? Not, they're not grammar Nazis focused on telling people what they should say or how they should write. And we'll talk about the tension between descriptive and prescriptive linguistics and grammar when we talk about teaching grammar, and how do you appreciate the many dialects that you might encounter in your classroom and support students who have many dialects while also helping them to achieve what we call SAE, or Standard American English, that they might need for business or higher education, etc. So that's a start to our semester. Hope it was interesting for you, and I look forward to seeing you later this week.